Sahana bhavatu, sahano bhunaktu, saha viryam karavavahai, tejasvinavaditam astu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May our study be energetic. May we get illumination from these studies. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace beyond all. So today's topic is inspirations from a great soul, because yesterday was what we call the Tithi Puja, that is the shifting birthday of one of the great disciples of Ramakrishna. We may say disciples, we may say apostles, following the model of Christianity where Jesus had 12 disciples or apostles. And so this was the same in terms of the inner circle that became the monastic disciples of Ramakrishna. And I feel particularly drawn to this one because it is Mahapurush Maharaj, that is literally a great royal soul. And of all the young boys who gathered around and became monastic disciples of Ramakrishna, this is the only one who has that kind of title given by Swami Shivanananda for his purity, and his monastic name was Swami Shivanananda. We have just done a meditation on Shiva, and you can imagine how the names are given to which are characteristic of the person. And so when you consider Swami Shivananda, he who has the bliss of Shiva, this would be a very special being. So if we understand the characteristic of Shiva, we will understand also the characteristic of Mahapurush Maharaj. Unlike many of the disciples of Ramakrishna, Tarak, as he was called, and there's some vagary or some uncertainty about exactly when he was born, but it is said that he was born on a Thursday in 1854. We know the month was probably November at that point, and so it goes on. But he was very nonchalant about it, and in fact took his whole astrology chart and threw it in the Ganga. He wasn't very much concerned about those kinds of things. This was characteristic of the person. Now his father was he was born into a dominant family, a prominent family, I should say, a family that had royal connections and so on. But his father was known to Ramakrishna even before Mahapurush or Tarak was introduced to Ramakrishna. It so happened that his father was a legal advisor to Rani Rasmani, who, as you know, the story of Ramakrishna begins with Rani Rasmani and her temple in Dakshinaswar. And he happened, therefore, to meet Ramakrishna and was drawn to him. And Ramakrishna, through his austerities, had burning sensations and asked him, what do you recommend to solve this? And Tarak's father recommended wearing an amulet with a sacred name on it, and it seemed to cure Ramakrishna. That is, it took away his burning sensations. And even when his father was called Ramkanai Ghoshal, and he was a successful lawyer, as we can see from what I've just said. And he had a substantial income, so a family of that type. But of course, it didn't last long. Much of his father's earnings was spent in removing the wants of holy men or holy people and poor, helpless students. You can say the social needs of his day. He was a person with a generosity of spirit like that. And it wasn't unusual for him to provide board and lodging for 25 or 30 students at a time in his own house. That's the kind of person he was. Now, part of this talk, well, you can say I'll be dipping into various texts in this talk, because you see, I'm not a biographical authority. I'm a bookworm, and so my job is only to chew books and spit them out to you. So I'll be referring to a couple of texts. One text is a book I've had with me for a long time, The Apostles of Ramakrishna. It comes out as Disciples of Ramakrishna, its latest edition, and it's compiled and edited by the eminent Swami Gambirananda. And Swami Gambirananda was a disciple of Holy Mother. But then there are a number of things that are off the record. In other words, that you may not find in any of these books. Because I happen to serve a disciple of Mahapurush Maharaj, Swami Shivanananda, and he introduced me to a number of other disciples of Swami Shivanananda. And so I have a few outstanding instances that are memories of their recounting their great teacher. And then maybe I will start with that. So my own teacher, when he got his mantra diksha from this eminent Swami Shivananda, who by that time was president of the order and the whole Ramakrishna Math and Mission. He was the second president. First president was Swami Brahmananda. And Swami Brahmananda, of course, they were both brother disciples. And Swami Brahmananda was said to be the spiritual son of Ramakrishna. Mahapurush was elected as a vice president, and that took him out of his comfort zone to some extent. His comfort zone really was of the deep, meditative, quiet, silent type, a kind of antisocial ascetic whose natural bent of mind was, like Shiva, to immerse himself in meditation. And it is this characteristic of purity and this meditative mood that characterizes him as Shivananda. And so my teacher came to him, and he was just struck by the beauty of the man's face. And those of you who are receiving thoughts and prayers, yesterday would have received a portrait of Swami Shivananda, and Swami Nisrasananda, as he wasn't called that then, Raman Maharaj. He was struck by the tremendous beauty and radiance of Mahapurush's face. And he thought, how, I wonder if I painted it, how would it look? And he was so absorbed with that, he completely forgot his mantra. And he had to come back and say, oh, by the way, I forgot my mantra. Can you tell me this again? So that was the one occasion. And then, of course, other people got malas. And they said to Nisrasananda, Raman Maharaj, oh, he didn't give you a mala? Ah, no, go and ask him. So he went back and asked him, and, you never gave me a rosary, a mala. And Shivananda said, yes, I don't sell them. And he dispatched him away again. And anyway, he got one. He bought one privately and got it blessed. But he realized that the reason why he never gave him a mala was he didn't want him to be absorbed with counting. He knew the personality of the person so well. And so that is one personal story. Another one really was the brahmacharis and monks used to, as was the custom, greet him as president and prostrate before him. And he had a very peculiar sense of humor, a kind of sense of internal mischievous joy. And as some of the brahmacharis would have bowed down at his feet, of course his mood was somber, or he gave that appearance. He would suddenly make an ugly face, and everybody around would laugh, and the poor fellow would look up and to laughter all around him. And of course, Mahapurush's face was serene again, and he would be very puzzled. Why is everybody laughing? So these are some of the characteristics of this great, great man. And so there's so much material on him. In front of me, I have a number of books: Mahapurush Maharaj as we knew him, reminiscences of Swami Shivanananda from so many people, and the book that I just described as well. And there's another book that recounts the various episodes of his life called The Saga of a Great Soul. So you'll find many, many books on this great soul, this outstanding soul. So how do we begin? Well, normally when we describe these great, great lights, we normally start off in sections because there are different episodes in them in the life. And we can describe them, I suppose, in categories. The first one is really the inspiration from the master, meeting the master, and the master's special touch, the transforming touch of the master, how the master shaped the young boys and young women and men around him. And this shaping was individual because he realized one formula will not suit another person. And so in his case, it wasn't long before he met Ramakrishna. He had heard about him. He had seen him at Ramchandra's house and thought, this is the person I have to see again. And so when he met him at Dakshinaswar, he had no idea where Dakshinaswar was. And it was after probably 3 or 4 meetings that Ramakrishna did what he did so often, to transmit spirituality at a mere touch. And he told the young boy, stick your tongue out. And he wrote a mantra on his tongue. And that had a transforming effect, complete transforming effect on him. And he did it some 3 times on different occasions. He saw the worth of him. And then, of course, when he found out, when he inquired about his family life, when he found out who his father was, that is, it was Ramkanai Goshal, then he said, what a beautiful man, because his father was a very accomplished tantric practitioner. And so he was delighted by that. Another incident really in his life was he wouldn't accept any service from Talak. Talak was a little put out by this. Other people were allowed to carry his pot and this and that. And then he thought, there's something wrong with me. I'm not pure enough. Until the master revealed to him, no. The thing is, you see, your father told me to wear this amulet. And so, in a sense, he's my teacher. And the reverence I give to teacher, I have to give to the son of a teacher also. And so it shows Ramakrishna's characteristics also as much as Tarak's. When we study these lives, we learn a little bit more about Ramakrishna himself and his strict adherence to truth. And then the second part that we have to study really is the Kashipur garden house, because it is there that a sense of fraternity comes amongst the young people who are there attending to Ramakrishna in his illness, because a kind of brotherhood bond forms where they have debates and discussions and mutual sharing of experiences all around, centered around this figure, Ramakrishna, and their dedication and devotion to the person who is everything to them. How to describe Ramakrishna? Well, Shivananda said later in his life, words to the effect that I have not understood Ramakrishna. More and more each day I do. And yet, somebody of the absolute perfect self-abnegation, somebody of such a generosity of spirit and the embodiment of love would exceed any example you can think of, any mere understanding of God that we have. And I'm learning day by day, increasingly in my old age. I'm paraphrasing a little, but this is pretty much what he had said. And then on Ramakrishna's passing away, he was one of the first to join the Bharanagar monastery, very rough building that was used as a monastery. And there he would see, he recalls that he woke up one evening and he saw little Shivas everywhere. And he was afraid even to get up and step. And he saw there in Swami Vivekananda the living Shiva walking. And so he more or less meditated the whole night. And in the morning, he told Swami Vivekananda about his vision. And Swami Vivekananda, he saw Swami Vivekananda as a shining Shiva. And so for that reason and for many other reasons, we really feel that Swami Vivekananda was the embodiment of Shiva. And that means then that we have the Holy Trinity in front of us in terms of Hindu trinities, that we have the Holy Mother as the Shakti of Brahma, Saraswati. We have Ramakrishna, the incarnation of the protecting, all-pervading one, Vishnu, who incarnates from age to age. And then we have Vivekananda as Shiva himself. And so we can see that Shivananda had these characteristics, these austere characteristics. He was a jnani. Ramakrishna obviously asked him the standard question, do you believe in a formless or a formed God? And being part of the Brahma Samaj as he joined, he said formless. And it was an occasion when Ramakrishna took him for the evening service at the Kali temple. And Ramakrishna bowed down. And Tarak hesitates. He's brought up by the Brahma Samaj who say, no, it's not right to bow down before images. And then he thinks, well, yes, but omnipresence, isn't it? Isn't God everywhere? And he bowed down as well, a person of this type. And then you see after the Kashipo garden house and after the Bharanagar monastery, all of them have this urge to go and travel, to go and intensify their spiritual life, their tapasya, a kind of yearning. We may call this the yearning stage. Now, if you see so far, this is the step-by-step indication of spiritual life itself. First of all, we make a preparation. We learn, and we take on the grace of the divine in order to help us grow. And then secondly, we try to form a fraternity, as it were, or a sorority with others of the same understanding or the same practice, so that we now feel that we're in good company. And then we take our inner journey, our inner path, making our will stronger. This is what's called tapasya. Tapasya means that deliberately causing a kind of counter heat, a friction, another habit by practice. And so the great austerities that Swami Shivananda practiced, and I'll read some of that experience that he had. So we read on a little bit here. After the passing away of the master, the small group of disciples clustered around the monastery of Bharanagar, and the first to come was Tarak, with whom soon joined Gopalda, Kali, and others. And the master's death had created a great void in the hearts of the disciples. And this is where the yearning starts. We feel an absence of the divine. And from that absence, we have a yearning. Even Ramakrishna experienced this yearning. And so the master's death had this void, and they had this yearning, they felt this emptiness. We can also relate, of course, in Christianity, how the great messianic expectation was dashed when Jesus was crucified on the cross. And then what? A kind of emptiness, a void, a kind of depression, until an inspirational spirit lifts everybody up again. So that period of their lives, which stretched over a number of years and which was packed with severe austerities and great miracles of faith, out of the mighty fire of which was forged the powerful character the world later saw, is mostly a sealed book. We have no idea in detail what the practices were. But towards the end of his life, Swami Shivanananda, that was his monastic name, when he became a monk, one day chanced to lift a corner of the pall of mystery which lay over these stormy years. He says, often it happened, he said, that I had only one piece of cloth to cover myself with. I used to wear half of it and wrap the other half around the upper part of my body. And in those days of wandering, I would often bathe in the water of wells, and then I used to wear a piece of loincloth and let my only piece of cloth dry. Now, in one of the single photographs of these days, we see the ragtag monks from Baranagar Mutt, and we see them in various states. I think the best dressed is Swami Vivekananda. They had to share clothes, there's no doubt. And Swami Shivananda, we see him with just a loincloth. And when they took this picture to America, they had to artificially superimpose clothing just to avoid the negative sensibilities of the American people. So many a night I slept, he says, under trees, and at that time the spirit of renunciation was aflame, and the idea of bodily comfort never entered the mind. And though I traveled mostly without means, thanks to the grace of the Lord, I never fell into danger. The Master's living presence used to protect me always. Now therein is a great, great lesson for all of us, that in times of discomfort or difficulties, regardless of what they are, is a kind of impoverishment. Is impoverishment of joy, let us say, for example, or equilibrium of mind, or settlement, or peace. And so what we do, we have to feel the living presence of the divine with us, practicing the presence of the divine. And when we do this, we find a sense of protection. It is no accident that a mantra is described as a protecting thought. By continuously, with feeling, repeating our mantra, it becomes a protecting instrument for us, because it evokes the protector. And so he says, often I didn't know where the next meal would come from. And all that period, and a deep dissatisfaction gnawed within, and the heart yearned for God. The company of men repelled me. Interesting. And that was his nature. I used to avoid roads generally used. At the approach of night, I would find some suitable place just to lay my head on and pass the night alone with my thoughts. Some indication of his bent of mind at this period can be had from a few reminiscences which have come down to all of us. He had a natural slant towards the orthodox and austere path of knowledge, jnana, which placed little value on popular religious attitudes. And so he wasn't much one for rituals and ceremonies. He avoided ceremonialist observances and disregarded emotional approaches to religion. This is why he's called Shivananda. He keyed up his mind to the formless aspect of the divine, and this stern devotion to jnana continued for some time. And deep down in his heart, however, lay his boundless love for the Master. So there's this great jnani with a bent towards that, and an austere life with an austere front. But you can see how my own teacher, looking at him, would have seen this beautiful face shining with incomparable love. Couldn't avoid it. And the love came from his love of the Master. Such great love for the Master, because the Master himself was the embodiment of love. Master, which had nothing, nothing could affect for a moment. And in later years, with the broadening of experience, his heart opened to the infinite beauties of spiritual emotion. even during his days with Ramakrishna, he used to see the master and burst into tears, and he didn't know why. Until the master told him, you see, weeping for God is such a beautiful thing. When you weep for God with that kind of yearning, then you see your realization is close at hand. And so he was very emotional around Ramakrishna. This great jnani that we see, so austere, was really a molten heart. And during his days of itinerancy, he was, of course, known as Mahapurushaji among his disciples, visited various places in North India. And in the course of these travels, he also went to Almora in the mountains, where he came acquainted with a rich man of the place, and who speedily became a great admirer of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna and took great care of them whenever he happened to meet them. And then here, towards the latter part of 1893, the year of Swamiji's journey to America, Tarak met somebody called Mr. E.T. Sturdy, an Englishman, who was interested in theosophy, and he introduced him to the concepts and life of Swami Vivekananda. And of course, from there on, Mr. Sturdy became a follower of Swami Vivekananda and invited him to England. And now we have, for our local interest, a chain of events, because it was in London that Sister Nivedita met him. It was sponsored by Mr. E.T. Sturdy. And so with the return of Swami Vivekananda from the West in 1897, we find a different phase coming in, because it's the end of the itinerant life. And Mahapurusha, he goes to meet Swamiji on his return, Swami Vivekananda, and returns with him to Kolkata. In terms of how he viewed Swami Vivekananda, there is a great indication of this. Well, I can't offhand find the passage, to be honest with you. I'm just looking. I saw it earlier so that I could quote from it. But suffice to say that he had this great love for Swami Vivekananda. And then I described, of course, earlier how he had this vision of Swami Vivekananda as Shiva. And so he was extremely dedicated to Swami Vivekananda. I'll find the passage probably later as I open the book. So the next phase of this life is now, okay, so I've led an itinerant life, now what? The next phase of my life is I have to be part of Swami Vivekananda's mission. And so in that same year, when Swami Vivekananda returns, at the request of Swami Vivekananda, he goes to Sri Lanka, what was then known as Ceylon, and he preaches Vedanta for some 8 months there. And he uses two texts, he teaches two texts. One is the Gita, and the other is the Raja Yoga of Swami Vivekananda. And they became popular with the local educated community, including a number of Europeans also. And one of his students, a Mr. Pickett, or I should say Mrs. Pickett, whom he gave the name Haripriya, was specially trained by him as to qualify her to teach Vedanta to the Europeans. That was a kind of strategic move, and she later went to Australia and New Zealand at his direction and succeeded in attracting interested students to both these countries. And so the Vedanta movement started there in Australia and New Zealand at his instance. And then he returned to the Mutt, or the monastery there, the Belu Mutt, in 1898, which was then housed in Nilamba Babu's house. Those of you who have been to Belu Mutt will know that it has been acquired, but it's a beautiful, beautiful place. It's the site of the early monastic movement there. There's also the site where Holy Mother lived and where Nivedita also was. And if you remember in Holy Mother's life, she undergoes this fivefold fire trial, if you will, this tapasya on the roof there, and you can see that roof. And if you go there, there's a very, very special feeling which is there. There's no doubt. Anyway, of course, 1899 was a year of great plague, and it breaks out as an epidemic in Kolkata. And Swami Vivekananda then rallies everybody around and asks Swami Shivanananda and others to organize relief work for the sick. And we can see here a person who is taken out of his propensity for meditation to go and teach, and now to involve himself in hands-on social activity. And he puts forward his best efforts with the least thought of his personal safety. And about the same time, there was a landslide or a landslip that did considerable damage to property at Darjeeling. And Mahapurush ji, he collected some money for helping those who were affected by it. So the natural drive of his mind was, of course, as we mentioned before, for a life of contemplation, an inner life. And so he went again to the Himalayas. And here we see his natural environment in the Himalayas, the land of Shiva. And he goes there to taste once more the delight and peace of meditation. But here he spent some years, although he would occasionally come down to the monastery for a visit. And about this time, Swami Vivekananda asked him to found a monastery in the Himalayas. And although he couldn't do it at the time, he realized it and remembered it, this wish, many years later. And so in 1915, which is 10 years or so, more than that, after Swami Vivekananda's death, he lays the beginnings of a monastery at Almora. And that was completing Swami Vivekananda's dear wish. And in 1900, when Swami Vivekananda is now still alive, he accompanies him on his visit to Mayavati, which is now, of course, the editorial office of the Prabhupada in the foothills of the Himalayas. And while returning to the plains, Swamiji left him at Pilibhit with a request that he should collect funds for the maintenance and improvement of the main mother house, monastery Belumat. And so he stayed back and he raises some money. See the practical thing. I have to mention, of course, that he did work because his father, with a change in employment, got less money. And so Tarak never really completed his education. He had to go and work. Another thing was that in terms of the money, a family arrangement had to be made, which resulted in Tarak having to marry. And so he married and he was extremely distressed by this. But Ramakrishna assured him everything was fine. And the reason why he was called Mahapurush Maharaj for his purity was that even during his marriage, he remained absolute chaste and pure. Anyway, shortly before Swamiji passed away, the king, the Raja of Binga, gave him about 500 rupees for preaching Vedanta. And Swamiji handed the money over to Swami Shivananda and asked him to start an ashram at the most sacred pilgrimage site of Varanasi. And of course, Swami Vivekananda dies in 1902. And so it's really to fulfill this wish, and another phase of his life begins. So let's go through it. This phase of his life now, where he now engages in the work of Swami Vivekananda, now continues in the most sacred place along the Ganga, the Varanasi. And he stays in Varanasi for 7 long years, and this is another chapter in his life. And during these 7 long years, we find it is very memorable because the ashram grew up not so much as a center of great social activity, but a school of hard discipline and rigorous tapasya, austerities. And it was there really for the development of the individual character of those who stayed there, as in all the hermitages of the old days. And here we are confronted with an almost insurmountable obstacle in trying to understand this phase of his life and the story of spiritual geniuses such as this person. Because the most active period of people like this, their lives, is devoid of events in popular estimation. It's not that they did anything great there. It's all private cultivation. It's hidden away from the public eye and spent in producing those invisible and intangible commodities whose value cannot be measured in terms of material goods. So what happened there? Well, we find that anxious times were ahead because they didn't have a lot of money, and the funds of the Varanasi ashram were soon depleted, and at times nobody knew where the next expenses of the day would come from. Sometimes they had food and sometimes they didn't. But Mahapurush, he carried on unruffled, and the clouds lifted after a while, and most of his time was spent in intense spiritual practices. But he took care of the inmates, and we'll see now some personal experiences that there was one person, one monk, suffering terribly, terribly from dysentery, and it was Mahapurush who himself cleaned him and cleaned the area of difficulties around him, you know. Himself, he did it and personally looked after everybody. And so most of the time, of course, was spent in spiritual practices. He would scarcely stir out of the ashram, and day and night he would be in a high spiritual mood. And the life in the ashram was one of severe discipline and hardship. And the inmates hardly enjoyed full meals for months. There was not much clothing to lessen the severity of the winter. Now, those of you who visited the Advaita ashram there, and there's also a home of service, which was also established, will understand the rare and beautiful atmosphere of this ashram. And I had the privilege of staying in the ashram a few years ago, and the pilgrim group that I was taking there, we were due to fly from Varanasi to Kolkata. And the room in which Mahapurush was staying in is preserved. It's kind of a storeroom now. And many of the disciples, Brahmananda, Latu Maharaj, who is Swami Adbhutananda, they stayed in these places. The whole ashram has a vibrant spiritual atmosphere in the midst of a broader spiritual atmosphere, which is Varanasi. And it's not far. It's with very easy walking distance down to the Ganga River. But what a beautiful atmosphere. Anyway, it so happened that our flight was cancelled, and I was due to give a talk in Kolkata on the following day, and I had to cancel it because the flight was cancelled because of fog over Varanasi. And it happened to be Swami Turiyananda's birthday the following day, and I had the wonderful experience of celebrating it almost in the room, right next door to the room where the great Swami Turiyananda, wonderful Swami Turiyananda, had his Mahasamadhi, his great passing. And so it was a wonderful thrill and experience for me, and I could see the divine hand in this. But there was certainly some of the relics of Ramakrishna were kept there, and some of them were stolen. And so they hunted everywhere for the relics of Ramakrishna, and they found some, or wherever they were thrown. And Mahapurush predicts that the land where those relics were, that will be obtained by the ashram in Varanasi, and so it was. And so it's a vast complex, a vast area. Anyway, he himself used to pass most of the nights on a small bench. In the winter months, he would usually get up at about 3 in the morning and light a dhuni, that is a fire in one of the rooms. And before this, they would sit for meditation. So there was no actual shrine room as such. And it offered continued fire into the morning. And I have to say, this is what makes Varanasi Ashram an Advaita Ashram, dedicated to non-dualism. And during these times, Swami Shivanananda, who was then the secretary of the organization, used to beg him and press him hard to collect funds for the local home of service, and would so jocosely, will mere meditation bring money, he used to say. But the Swami Shivananda, he couldn't be moved from his tenor of life. And from time to time, he opened a school at the ashram where he himself taught English to a group of local boys. And about that time, he also translated Swami Vivekananda's Chicago lectures into Hindustani so that the Swami Vivekananda's ideas could spread among the people. And he continued to look after the affairs of the ashram until 1909, 7 years on. And at that time, he returns to Belur and lives there for some time. But of course, the following year, 1910, he then goes back on a pilgrimage to Amarnath up in the Himalayas in the company with Swami Turiyananda and Swami Premananda, both brother disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. But on his return, he falls seriously ill. And it was a terrible illness. And after that, he then becomes extremely careful about his diet, having very simple food and a strict dietary regimen. Swami Shivananda, along with Swami Subodhananda, are the only two monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna where there is a film, and you can see the film of them walking. And in those days, the camera, of course, was one of these, operations with the handle, and you can hear the squeaking of the handle. And you can see also many other prominent Swamis of the Ramakrishna order there, including Swami Purnananda, who did sterling work in America. But you see them taking a walk around the monastic premises. It was one thing that he used to do. He used to make sure that he walked every day, at least around the premises. And he was so concerned about all the aspects of the monastery, he would make inquiries. And when ultimately he was paralyzed in a later condition, one half of his face was paralyzed, he would still inquire in great detail about the food, about how the monks were being looked after, and so on and so forth. That concern he had. But in 1910, he's elected as vice president. And so he's coming out of his meditative life, in a way, this phase of his life. And in 1917, Swami Premananda, who used to manage the affairs of the monastery at Belur, he fell seriously ill, and the management duties fell on the shoulders of Swami Shivananda. And of course, in 1922, the Swami Brahmananda passes away, and Swami Shivananda is elected the president of the Ramakrishna Math and Mission, and he continues that to the very end of his life. Shortly before that, he'd been on a few places, Dhaka and Mymensing and so on invitation. He was a good speaker. In 1933, I think it was, there was a general assembly of all devotees. And one extract from it that comes to mind was, he says, "Be like the sword in the wielder's hand. It doesn't complain if it falls on a hard place." And his message was, we have to feel that we are instruments in the divine hands. And that will remove all sense of complaints or difficulties or egoism. The wonderful lesson. So he had such an all-round capacity, and he had this capacity to convey a message in simple, high-impact words. My own teacher would have said how he would have taught those around him with, in a beautiful way, understanding from first-hand experience the purport of scriptures and remove all doubts very effectively among the students. So in 1924, 1927, he went on 2 long tours in the south of India. And of course, the whole organization is growing despite a number of severe difficulties. And new centers are opening everywhere, including Uttakamund, that he loved very much. And Uttakamund is up in the Nilgiri Hills. I was there a few years ago, a wholly transformed place. And Goodwin, who was the stenographer, if you like, to Swami Vivekananda for many of his talks, he is also buried nearby there. So the story of acquiring Uttakamund really was that a local person had a dream that a monk was in the area and he needs some land. And when he saw Swami Shivanananda, he said, that's the monk. And so the Uttakamund land came. And he would spend times in Uttakamund in a very, very high spiritual mood. See, the natural environment of the mountains put him in this high spiritual mood always. And in 1925, during the winter, he went to Dergaon, accompanied by a large number of monks from the Beru Math, to open the first buildings of the local Ramakrishna mission. And he stayed there for a little while, maybe over 3 weeks. And that was a period, according to all accounts, of unalloyed joy amongst everybody. And it's recorded, you see, that wherever he went, he carried an atmosphere of delight around him. Monks and devotees thronged around him morning and evening, and for hours the conversations on spiritual subjects continued. There are 2 incidents at Dergaon and Uttakamund that are worth recounting, and so it goes like this. During his stay at Dergaon, he had a severe attack of asthma, which compelled him to spend the night in a sitting position. And as the suffering was intense and he felt like dying, he concentrated his mind on the indwelling self and became immediately oblivious of pain. And when relating the incident the next day, he said, as it was the meditation of a mature age, the mind soon dived inward, and he pointed to his chest. What is that, sir? A listener asked. And he said, that indeed is the self. And then in the Uttakamund hills, he had was a moment of high spiritual tranquility, and it easily lifted his mind to a higher level of experience all the time. And as he sat one day looking out at the blue hills spreading in front like the waves of a sea, he felt as though something emerged out of his body and spread all over the landscape and became identified with all that existed. And so it is speculated that he experienced the cosmic form, which we call Virat. But in 1930, his health breaks down greatly. And though he could still take short walks, what a cataract of disasters and difficulties had come since 1927. First of all, the loss of his brother monks, of his comrades and dear friends of the old days, one after the other. And then trouble and defections within the organization, and then illness and physical disabilities. All of them came to him. But nothing could for a moment dim the brightness of his burning flame of reliance on God. They only brought into high relief the greatness of his spiritual qualities. And at night after meals, he would usually pass an hour or so all alone, except for the presence of an attendant or 2 who used to be near him. And whenever he was alone, he seemed to be immersed in a profound spiritual mood. And he would occasionally break the silence by gently uttering the Master's name. The mood would recur whenever, in the midst of an almost uninterrupted flow of visitors and devotees, he found a little time to himself. And in the middle of terrible physical suffering, he would radiate joy and peace all around. Not once did anyone hear him utter a syllable of complaint against the torments which assailed the flesh. And to all inquiries about his health, his favorite reply was, Janaki is all right so long as she is able to take the name of Rama. Janaki, as we know, is the other name for Sita. As long as Sita takes the name of Rama, you see. Physicians who came to treat him were amazed at his buoyant spirits, which nothing could depress. And sometimes he would point to his pet dog, because he had a pet dog that he was very fond of. And he said, "That fellow's master is here," pointing to himself. And then pointing one finger to himself and another to the master's shrine, he would add, "And this fellow is his dog." But age, which diminishes our physical and mental vigor, serves only to heighten the force and charm of a spiritual personality. And the last years of Swami Shivananda's life were days of the real majesty of a spiritual sovereign. The assumption of the vast spiritual responsibilities of this great office that he wore tore off the austere mask of reserve and rugged taciturnity, which so long hid his tender heart and broad sympathy. And all these years, thousands upon thousands came to him, men, women, young and old, rich and poor, high and low, the homeless and the outcast, people battered by faith, reeling under the 1,001 miseries to which man is prey, and went back lifted up in spirits. And once he saw poor people rescuing the leavings of a feast, and he said, oh, his heart opened. His heart said, oh, as long as we have people in this condition, we will not be uplifted ourselves. And he went and ordered a big feast for everybody who was there. Laborers in different fields came to him and went away heartened by words of cheer and sympathy. His love was too broad to be limited by sexual interests, and it extended to every place and its every movement where good was being done. Ultimately, his health, which was already shattered, broke down still more, and beyond recovery in May 1933. When, of course, he had an attack of apoplexy, which deprived him of the use of half of his body, including his speech, and he passed away on February 20th, 1934, leaving a memory which is like a golden dream flung suddenly from one who knows not where into this harsh world of reality. And the real is that which is an object of experience. And to Swami Shivananda, God and religion were not vague words or distant ideals, but living realities. Lives like his light up the dark recesses of history and point to the divine goal towards which humanity is traveling with growing knowledge. Some of his teachings would go like this: the right kind of service is possible only when one sees God in one person, in the person served. But it is difficult to have this knowledge at the outset. So to start with, one has to depend on the word of one's guru and take them on faith. We must have faith in Swamiji, Swami Vivekananda, who has propounded this doctrine of service. The master's life is the aphorism, as it were, and Swamiji's is the commentary on it. Swamiji formulated this doctrine of service, seeing God in everything, from several incidents in the master's life. One has to meditate on the different centers in the Sushumna, the nerve current flowing through the spinal column. And in the heart, one has to meditate on one's chosen deity as sitting on a red lotus with 12 petals. And in the head, on the guru, as seated on a white lotus with 1,000 petals. These meditations help japa and therefore should be practiced, and so on. Now, because time is short, I'm going to open randomly some reminiscences from people who knew him. The one comes from a Swami Janatmananda. He says, I first saw Mahapurush Maharaj at the Howrah station. He was returning from Bombay via Nagpur, and we were a little delayed in reaching the station, and the train had already arrived. And seeing his tall figure, bright complexion, and wonderful sweet smile, you often think of him as very austere, but actually this is how he was. and seeing his tall figure and so on. And he said, I was unable to control myself and knelt down before him and clasped his feet. He simply looked at me affectionately and said, "Who is that? Who is that?" and gave me a little slap on the back. And a few months later, before I began my first year's studies in college, Mahapurush Maharaj visited our students' home and spent the night. And after evening arati, he blessed all of us, saying, I pray, no, I bless all of you, that you may have firm faith and devotion in Thakur. May it be firm, may it be firm. Even after a few more days, he went to Belumat, bowed down at Swami Shivananda's feet and requested him to grant initiation, Diksha. Immediately he said, we don't give initiation and such things as that is for the priests to give. I was taken aback, he says. Anyhow, he also spoke some sweet words and then said, the Lord has taken human birth in the form of Sri Ramakrishna. And I asked him, well, can we not call on the Lord as mother? And he said, well, why not? This practice was very prominent in the life of Thakur. But we should not think that that attitude alone is correct and others are not. And November 9th, 1925 was the birthday of the national leader, Surendranath Banerjee, and a holiday at Ripon College. And he says, I went to the monastery and made pranams to Mahapurush Maharaj. When he asked, where do you live? What do you do? And I live at the student's home and study in the college. And he replied, don't you have college today? And I said, I study in Ripon College, and today is this national birthday. So the college is closed. And before passing away, this Surendranath had given a lot of money for the poor students of the college. And hearing this, Mahapurush Maharaj became very happy. And after asking me a few other questions, he said, you will have it. I was still sitting before him. Then he said, take your bath and go to the shrine. I'm also going there. He's talking about his Diksha, his initiation. Having said, we don't give such things. Please give it and so on. He read the heart and the timing was right. What else to do? I went downstairs in great delight, borrowed a towel from one of the sadhus, took my bath in the Ganga and went to wait in the shrine. And after some time, I was called and was given the mantra initiation. And then he said, you must give something for our offering. And I replied, I don't have anything with me. And he said, go downstairs and bring a mirobalan fruit from the shrine storeroom. And his attendant was waiting by the door. And when I told him what Mahapurush Maharaj had said, he brought me the fruit, or 1 or 2 oranges and some marigolds. And that was all that was required. And when the initiation was over, I began repeating the divine name. But where was Thakur? The Divine Mother alone kept coming into my mind. And this was probably because I was born in a family of staunch Tantrika worshippers on both my father's side and my mother's side. And even before my sacred thread ceremony, I used to repeat, Ma, Ma. So one day I anxiously went to Mahapurush Maharaj and asked him about this. And he replied, that's all right. Thakur and the Divine Mother are one and the same. And this dispelled all my doubts. I mentioned the convention, I said in 1933, but there was one convention of the Ramakrishna Math and Mission in 1926, and many sadhus had assembled the Math. And a few of us had come to do some volunteer work. And while we were there, we heard Mahapurush Maharaj tell a few devotees who had come for initiation, we don't give initiation or any such thing. Simply repeat the name of Ramakrishna. I can repeat the name to you right here in my room or in the shrine room. And the leader of the group of devotees was Swami Shivanananda, at the time still known by his former name. And he said, then please tell it to us in the shrine room. And Mahapurush Maharaj said, very good, we've done today. About the glory of Sri Ramakrishna's name, he said, these fellows say that lust comes to them. If one repeats the name of Ramakrishna and meditates on him, why should lust come? Through meditation on Sri Ramakrishna, such passions as lust and the like all fly away. So we get some insight. Then after the convention, Mahapurush Maharaj went for a visit to South India. Then we have some other record here. He says, and it's the same. 38 years have passed since I received the grace of Mahapurush Maharaj. I've fallen into many temptations in the world, and from time to time my mind has seemed to become overwhelmed, but to this very day I have never come to slip from the path. It is as if someone were preventing me from doing anything that would drag me down. I have neither the competence nor the capacity to do this myself. It is he who prevents me. I lack the strength to even hold on to his hand. And someone else is holding my hand, ever protecting me from being drowned in the world. Many times in my life in the world, various difficulties, dangers, and elements have befallen me. But each time I have been rescued like a drowning man being raised from the water. He would not allow me to drown. That's how much faith he had in this great, great soul. Now, because time has now run out severely, I would hold up a book that I recommend. So this is the book, Mahapurush Maharaj, As We Knew Him, is one book about this remarkable life. Even more remarkable will be the saga of a great soul. And here comes the quotation which I briefly mentioned that I had before. Mahapurush indeed adored Swamiji. It is a devotee. If a devotee brought some special flowers, incense, or sweets for Swami Shivanananda, he would at once say, "Go offer them in Swamiji's room first." And while strolling on the veranda, he invariably came to the door of Swamiji's room, which was only a few steps from his own, and there he bowed down to that memory of Swami, saying, "Victory to Swamiji Maharaj." And if you go to Belumat ever on a pilgrimage, you will, of course, see Swami Vivekananda's room, but you'll also see right next door Swami Shivananda's room, Mahapurush Maharaj's room also. This is from a book, Saga of a Great Soul, and that is also good recommended reading. So this is a very brief insight into a very enlightening soul, a soul whose life we can read about and contemplate on and get inspiration from in our own lives, and being a beaming inspiration for others. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
For those lingering on, I'll just remind you in a summary of the poem I wrote for this life. And so if you just bear with me, I'll repeat it and then you can finish off. Guiding light of Shiva shine, monk and leader roll in shrine, in whose hand raised up to bless, serenely held in storms and stress. Great souls who visit us are rare, for praise or blame they do not care. Raised at the lotus feet of Master, urge and surge will increase faster. From great hardships to service acts, from man's frame full divine acts, through love as broad as heart can be, while mind equates with samadhi. To one whose glorious chapters write, the way to live and increase height, like snow-clad mountain tops inspire, to climb up more, then even higher. And the prayer that goes with it, O Lord, how can I ever express sufficient thanks for thy infinite grace? Grant that I may emulate the very highest ideal lives and reflect at least a little of them myself. Grant me the courage of a lion, good humor of a player, the wisdom of the sages, and compassion of the self-sacrificing. And so we summarize really the life and teachings of Swami Shivananda.